Edit Mode is a new feature in NCS Plus that allows users to make many customizations directly from the exam screen. With Edit Mode, users can add, delete, or rearrange sites and segments, add or edit normal values, edit result tables, both columns and headers, and edit tab data and report result tables, and create new tests directly from the exam window. To enable Edit Mode, click on the Edit icon in the top right corner of the results window next to the cogwheel. When Edit Mode is enabled, you'll see all the sites and segments that are set up for this particular test, even hidden sites. Once you're finished making any changes that you want to make with Edit Mode, just go to Edit, Save Test Parameters, and that will save those changes for future exams. If you're using a CADLink preserve file, you'll need to make sure that at the end of your session, you go back to the home screen and select File, Update CADLink Preserve File. This will make those changes permanent to all the other computers that share that preserve file. If you're unsure if you're using a CADLink preserve file or not, just look in the bottom right hand corner of your screen in the home screen, and if there's a preserve file listed here, then you know that you're using a CADLink preserve file, and that needs to be updated using that file, Update CADLink Preserve File. You'll also want to make sure that your user has permissions to edit that preserve file before you start this process. We'll begin by showing you how to edit sites and segments. So if we're in Edit Mode, you can see at the top of the screen we have these new buttons available. This is where you can add a site or delete a site and then rearrange the sites in the order that you want them. You have the same buttons for your segments table. So if we want to add a site between wrist and elbow, we just simply click the plus button. That's going to give us a new site below wrist. And here we can choose what stim site we want. We can choose from the list of available stim sites, or you can free type any stim site you want. In this case, I'm going to add a forearm site between the wrist and elbow. So I'm going to select forearm. The recording site I'm going to keep the same, and it's the same nerve and same nerve type, and I'm going to keep this one visible so I don't check the hidden box. I can add a segment right from here, but I'm going to show you how to do it from this button down here. So we're going to hit OK. That added our forearm site between the wrist and elbow. Now if I want to add a segment for that, I can just click plus, and then I can choose my segment. I want a segment between the forearm and the wrist, and then maybe I want another segment between the elbow and the forearm. Always choose the most proximal segment site first, and then the more distal site. And now I can rearrange these in the order I want. So I'm going to put the forearm to wrist right after. I'm just push the up arrow, so I have forearm to wrist as my first site, and then elbow to forearm as my second site, and then I can keep the elbow to wrist site in case I don't stim the forearm. And then axilla to elbow and herbs to axilla. Now we have these sites and segments changed, so now we can go ahead and take off Edit Mode and then go to Edit, Save Test Parameters if we want to keep that change permanently. You can use Edit Mode just to make a one-time change. If you don't do that last step of Edit, Save Test Parameters, that change won't be saved for the future exams. If I want to save this test as a new test and keep my original test the same as it was, rather than going to Edit, Save Test Parameters, I can go to Edit, Save as New Test. When choosing this option, I'll be given a dialog box where I can name the test. And in this case, I'm going to name this median with forearm, for example. That will give me a new test called median with forearm right in my study window. Once you've added a new test, we also have a way to create a new study directly from the exam window that includes that test. So simply put the test where you want to see it. In this case, I'm going to put it below median motor. If I want to see a left and a right, I can come over here and choose a left, and now I have both a left and a right copy of that test. And now that I have this new study list set up, I can just right click and save study list as, and that's going to give me a dialog box where I can save this new study list and name it whatever I want. And then the next time I go to my navigator, when I go to my study list, I'll see that new study list available for me. For editing or adding normal values or reference limits, we're going to go into edit mode and then click on the field. So if we want to change this reference limit here, just click on it, and that brings up the reference limits dialog, and all you have to do is put in a new max range for that onset latency, and that changes the reference limit. Edit save test parameters will keep that change permanent. If we want to create a new reference limit, we can just click in a blank field or in this field, and then just click plus to add a reference limit. If you want to do a group reference limits, for example, by age or gender or BMI, you can just right click and show patient group setup. So now you can see it added a patient group section. So when you add a reference limit, it pre-populates the nerve, the stim site, the recording site, and the parameter, because that's based on the field that you selected. And then all that's left for you to do is put in the different groups and then add the reference limits. So for example, if we're going to create a reference limit based on age, you just put in the age group. So let's just say the first one is 0 to 5. We can choose whether this is less than or less than or equal to by clicking. We'll keep it less than, so that means it's going to be from people from the age of 0 up to the age of 5. And then put in the reference limit. Let's just say that was 4.3. And then the plus button will add a new row, copying all the same parameters of the first row. So we just need to change the age group. We'll say this was 5 to 15, or 16, and then the reference limit for that group. And you can add as many groups as you need to add here. If you see a yellow cell, that means that it's either missing a demographic that's used by the reference limit, or the reference limit doesn't cover this particular demographic. So if I look at my patient info, this patient was born in 77, that's a 45-year-old patient. So if I look back at my reference limits, and sure enough, I only went up to age 40. So make sure you have reference limits that cover your full group of ages, so that you don't end up with these yellow cells. Often you'll see that if you just forgot to put in a birth date, you'll see the yellow cell because it's looking for an age to display the reference limit. You can note that we also support mean standard deviation reference limit setups and regression setups. So you can just turn on or off whichever setups you want to use. Edit mode can also be used to edit the columns and headers of our result tables. So to do that, we'll go to edit mode, and then remember we have unique result tables for motor, sensory, F-wave, and H-reflex. So go to the test type that you want to edit. I'm going to edit sensory. And so this particular setup is set up with a latency, with a peak latency and a peak-to-peak amplitude, and then conduction velocity based off peak. If I want to change this to onset latency and then an onset to peak amplitude and a conduction velocity measuring the difference in onset, I'll just go to edit mode, then right click, and here I can add a section, I can move sections, or I can remove sections. So I'm just going to remove this whole column here, and I'm going to remove this column. And I'm going to right click, it's always going to add it to the right, so I'm going to right click here, add a section, and in this case it's a sensory section, and I want start latency, which is your onset latency. And I can choose whether I want it with or without a normal range column. I'm going to choose with the normal range column. If I didn't want to see the normal range, I would just choose this selection here. So that gave me this result. I can double click and name that whatever I want. Maybe I just want to call it latency. And then I can right click and add another section, and we're going to do this one. We want negative peak to start with the normal range. And again, if I forget what this is, I can just hover over it, and that shows me it's the start latency. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to call this peak latency, or sorry, I'm going to call this is amplitude. So I'm going to double click here and call this amplitude. And you can be more specific. You can call that amplitude, O to P, whatever you want to label that. And then down below here, if I want to add or change these to onset instead of peak, first I'm going to just go ahead and delete the conduction velocity. So we'll remove that column. And then I'm going to add a section. In this one we want start conduction velocity. So now it's using the onset latency. I'm going to call it conduction velocity. And then this is showing the delta P. You don't have to show the delta, but if you want to show the delta, that's the difference. And so this is the negative peak latency difference. We can just add a section and choose start latency difference. I don't want a normal range with this one, I just want this parameter. And then I can just remove this one. We'll call it whatever you want to call it. Oops. Oops, I put it delta twice. So there's our new setup. Now we also want to update the left-right compare table. So we can come here, and for here I think it's just easiest to start over from scratch. So I'm just going to remove all those, and then I'm going to remove these. So we'll start here, add a section, and I want to see a left-right of the start latency, and I'm going to see it with a normal range. So that automatically put in this column, which is going to show the left results, the right results, and then the side difference with the normal range. And I can do the same thing, just right click. I'm going to add a section for left-right amplitude, and here we wanted to do negative peak to start amplitude. And again, it puts in this column for us. We can relabel these if we want to. Just double clicking to relabel. And we can do the segments as well. So here I'm going to right click, add a section left and right. And here we want to see the difference in the start conduction velocity. I'm going to call this. All right, so now we've updated all of our tables in our sensory test to how we like them. And now if we want to, rather than having to do that separately in our view 1 and view 2, we can just click this button next to each one and copy this table layout to view 2. We could also copy it to tab data and report if we want them to be exactly the same, or we can set these up different. I'm just going to keep them different for now. Do the same thing here, and same thing here. That way we don't have to redo that again in both views. If you don't use view 2, it doesn't really matter. I usually like to keep them both the same though, just so that there's no confusion. If at this point, it's always good to go ahead and just test your parameter. So just stimulate something and get a result on there, so you can make sure all the right numbers are showing up. When you change cursors, make sure the right numbers are registering the cursor change. So here we have our start latency, our negative peak latency, and our positive peak to latency. And that's where we're going to get our results from, our result table. If we want to set up the result tables in tab data and report, you can go to tab data. And you'll notice in tab data, there's also an edit mode icon. So to edit these tables here, we're just going to click on edit mode. And when you enable edit mode in tab data, you'll see a button. This is how we show our report table setup. So that allows us to edit both the tab data tables and the reports. I think it's best to keep those both the same. So go ahead and click edit mode, set up these tables, this table and the left-right comparison table, however you want to see it, and using the same method that was shown just a few minutes ago. And then once those are set up how you like them, you can just click the copy button and copy that layout to the report. and then hit OK. And you can do that with each, you'll want to do that with all your different tables. If you click the report, it shows you what your report tables are going to look like. So in this case, there is this table, and in the report, there's not a left-right compare table. And you can actually show that. If you want to see the left-right compare table, you can come in here and you can show it. But this is, let's see, we wanted, that's left-right. You go to show. And then you'd see that table there. So whatever is shown in this table setup when the report icon is selected is what's going to be shown when you actually generate a report. So that's how you use edit mode to edit your result tables. All that can be done obviously still in test setup. This just gives you a way to do it within the exam screen if you want to do it that way. And that was a brief tutorial on how to use edit mode to make customizations within the exam screen. The benefit of doing this is always so that you can test out all the changes you've made while you're in the test. So now that we've edited reference limits or changed our columns and headers, you can go ahead and collect data and make sure everything's showing up how you expect it to. And when you place cursors, you'll see all those changes reflected and make sure all the results are showing up how you want to see them. You can type in a default distance if you want one. That would just start the distance at that point. So just type in any distance that you want and use edit save test parameters, and then you can have default distances shown up that way as well. And finally, just a reminder, when you've made the changes that you want to make, to keep those changes as default, always go to edit save test parameters and then go back to your home screen. And if you're using a CAD-Link preserve file, I'm not here, but if you are, you'll want to also go up to File, Update CAD-Link preserve file. If you're unsure whether or not you have permissions to update the CAD-Link preserve file, you can go into Setup and select Manage Users. You may not have permissions to get here, but if you do and you're an admin, you can come in here and look at your user and make sure there's a checkbox next to Can Update Preserve File. That means if you're using a CAD-Link preserve file, you have permissions to update that, which will synchronize that across all your systems. If you're using local settings, then you don't need those permissions because you're just updating the settings on your local PC. And that is the end of this tutorial for the edit mode in NCS Plus.